Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and welcome to this Hijabi Life. I'm your host, Hakeemah, and as always, we talk on this show about modest fashion, Muslim women, and the modern age. And I mention episode after episode that what we wear as Muslim women, as Muslims in general, it always is more meaningful than just fashion. And today is another story in that regard. Today, we're going to be talking about Tatreez, which is a traditional method of embroidery from the Palestinian culture. And I am so delighted to be joined by someone who is an expert at Tatreez, Bayan Fares. So, Assalamu alaikum, Bayan.
Salam Hakeemah, it's nice to be on here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Let me just read your bio. Bayan is a Palestinian writer, poet, licensed social worker, Tatreez instructor, and founder of Badan Collective. She has a master's in social service administration from the University of Chicago and resides in the Chicagoland area. She founded Badan on the premise of keeping the tradition of Tatreez, Palestinian embroidery, thriving in the diaspora, which has allowed her to teach Tatreez courses all over the nation. So that is amazing. And one thing I want to say is that we both are actually University of Chicago graduates. I don't know if you know that.
No way, I did not know that.
Yes, I went to University of Chicago as well. So they crank out the geniuses, mashallah. You being way before me, mashallah.
No, are you kidding me? You definitely precede me in so many ways, mashallah.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. So, and I'm also from Chicago, so we are already on the same wavelength before we even start the conversation. So, thank you so much for being here. So, I think it would be a missed moment for me to start without mentioning that today, I think, marks the 18th day of the assault on Gaza. It is a moment that is particularly difficult for Palestinians. It is difficult for Muslims, for the Ummah, for humanity. The genocide that is currently surging in the Gaza Strip and the occupation in general has reached a horrible surge. So I want to start by making a prayer. May Allah forgive the shuhada. May Allah protect the people of Palestine and allow you to see a free Palestine in your lifetime. And it's very possible with Allah's strength.
Yes, ameen,
ameen. Ameen. So here we are at this point in history, and we're talking about art. We're talking about embroidery. We're talking about fashion. But the two are not unlinked. This history of resistance for the Palestinian people and the art that you weave into your clothing, they are very much connected. So I want to start at the beginning. Tell us, what is Tatreez and how is that connected to a history of resistance in Palestine?
Yeah, well, there's so much to your question that you have just implied. So I love that you're starting with that. I think yes, let's start at the beginning. So, for those who don't know, Tatreez is a Palestinian craft. It is essentially the cross stitch. So, Palestinians have traditional garments that are called thobes, and there's other garments that have multiple names as well. But the most common one is a thobe with Tatreez on it. Tatreez is essentially the cross stitch. The actual stitch is practiced in multiple cultures in places all over the world, but it's particularly unique in the way that Palestinians use it in their clothing and also the history that it has within the Palestinian culture. So that is what it is. It's the tradition of the cross stitch, but there's also so many other different types of stitches that Palestinians use in their garments and in their dresses. There's well over 17 types of stitches that we use, all mostly decorative, but they're also very functional as well. So there's even stitches that join two pieces of fabric together called the manajil. There's the habka stitch that is like a binding interlace stitch that helps bind areas like the neckline or the sleeves of a dress. You also have like a couching stitch, which is another a decorative stitch. So there's so much that goes into the Palestinian garments, but the most common stitch that we use is tatreez. So it is an art craft for Palestinians. But the other thing that you touched on was resistance, or the relation between art and resistance. And I think that that is such a potent question because of the relation that it has with the Palestinian people. You cannot talk about the Palestinian arts without talking about or relating it to the origins of that craft, which is the Palestinian people. Those two things cannot be separated. Um, and that's something that I often teach throughout my workshops, is to make sure that we're not only practicing a beautiful art and craft, but making sure that we're acknowledging the origins of that craft, and also showing up in support and solidarity for the people who, like you just mentioned, are going through an active ethnic cleansing and an active genocide. And anyone who is using those words, including myself, does not use those words lightly. It has been a slow ethnic cleansing ever since 1948, and that has become ever so much more blatant and aware with what's happening in Gaza right now. So it's even more so important for us to, again, show up in solidarity, but also, practice these arts with the knowledge that we are working towards something. Something that I also stress in my classes, because again, we are practicing the arts, right? So like, what is the relation between the arts versus what is happening right now? And my take on it is essentially that we are preparing ourselves for a free country. So we are not here to stitch, to guilt trip ourselves because we're in the diaspora, or to feel like we cannot do anything besides stitching, right? Stitching is a very, very important way to resist colonialism and to resist what is happening to the Palestinian people. It does not supersede other forms of resistance. They are equally as important. It is, but it is definitely an important way. And I think Tatreez is very, there's an extra layer there because it is also a way of, there's a lot of history there. There's a very particular way, that there's an important role that Tatreez plays in the way that women resisted.
I remember I saw a video online, and the creator of that video was talking about the symbolism in the actual stitches of Tatreez. And my mind was blown. I did not know. I mean, I've seen plenty of thobes from like Palestinian women would wear it to like henna parties, and it's beautiful. And it's a very characteristic way of stitching. So you can kind of point out a Palestinian thobe somewhere. But I never knew there was so much symbolism in the
Mhm,
actual
mhm.
pictures made by
Yeah.
the stitching. So can you break down what that symbolism is?
Yeah, so like we just mentioned, Tatreez is an art form and a craft and a creative outlet. And like any art or creative outlet, it will always allow for creative expression and for people to express their sentiment and their experiences. So Tatreez is in that way something that tells the story of the Palestinian people. And like we were also mentioning, how it plays a really important role in resistance because of the way that women would stitch their stories and their experiences based on the time period, of that the time period that that specific thobe or dress was stitched in. So you have the way that women would essentially stitch their dresses pre 1948 and even up until this day was to essentially see what was in their surroundings and then to stitch that into their dresses. That was the most common practice. And sometimes that included things like flowers or trees or nature or animals. But then over time, it also included things like gravestones and barbed wire and Palestinian flags and the Dome of the Rock and slogans like "We will return." That those last three motifs or designs really started coming into play around the late 80s, because of the first Intifada, and it was a dress that was ended up being coined the Intifada dress by Widat Kawar, which is a really big giant in the Tatreez world. She's based in Amman, Jordan. She has her own collection, but she coined that term of the Intifada dress, and that dress is it came about in the first Intifada, because there was an Israeli ban on the usage of Palestinian colors in public, including things like holding flags in public and things of that nature. So, what women would do is they almost had this very much underground railroad situation where they would stitch in the dark and really stitch those colors onto their dress, because it wasn't something that was each easily snatchable by the soldiers while they were in public. So that was their form of resistance. So when we talk about the symbolism of Palestinian dresses, it can run very deep, and it can also be very just nice and something pretty to look at. You know, we have to acknowledge again that the art cannot be separated from the people. And there is this very famous poet. I'm forgetting her name, but it's a very famous line where it's, you know, we teach life, sir. And I think the Palestinian people, regardless of how much, you know, resistance and struggle there is, we are still a people of love and life and community and just being and existing on our land. And so I think when we're talking about the symbolism of dresses, both of those always come into play. You know, books also started coming out, which is a relatively more modern thing, where specific motifs on dresses will have certain names and certain origins, even from very specific villages based on where you go in Palestine. You know, there's different dresses that the styles differ per region. Um, so certain motifs even have certain names, but not everything does, right? You know, so the most common thing, even for my aunts or my grandma, the way that they would practice is they would see a motif or a design on another woman's dress that they really liked, and they would just copy that, right? So again, I think the Palestinian, when we're talking about the symbolism, I think it incorporates um, life as a Palestinian, just everything.
Mashallah. You mentioned one of my favorite poems
Hmm.
from the sister who said, "We teach life, sir." I think her
Yeah.
name is Rafif Ziada.
Yes.
If
Yes.
not,
Yes.
okay. That poem always brought me to tears. Like anytime I
Hmm.
would listen to it. And during times like this, I particularly go back to listen to that because I need to hear it again. It is
Hmm.
so powerful. One thing that I thought of as you talked about the weaving and the symbolism and all of that, you know, as a Black woman, I've learned more about why we braid hair in a certain kind of pattern as well. Why it's called in some countries cane rose, why it's called cornrows in other, because of how it looks like the rose that, I mean, there's so much symbolism in these art forms. Um, Even the fact that back in the times of enslavement, there were people that would braid maps into the hair in order to show like the path towards freedom. It's so beautiful the way that
Hmm.
the culture is being held onto on our persons, whether it's like the clothing that you're wearing or the hair
Hmm.
that you're braiding. It's like you're trying to hold on to the culture that you know is so vibrant and so full, but it's being taken away from you by oppressive
Hmm.
forces. And the only way it can live on is if you teach the next generation and if you do
Yeah.
it yourself and you hold on to those things. It's absolutely beautiful. I love that you explained that symbolism to us. How did you get into Tatreez? Was this something that you grew up doing? How did you learn to embroider
Mm.
yourself?
Yeah, I almost feel like, you know, it's sort of a little bit of a chicken and egg situation. I don't really remember a time when I wasn't practicing Tatreez. I just I don't know really how it came into my life. I mean, I know when it came into my life, but it was just always sort of there. I learned Tatreez from my mom. I used to live in Amman in Jordan, so my mom was the one who initially taught me, and then you know, I had this idea as like a 9, 10 year old little girl that I wanted to complete like a quilt. And I wanted to make like 100 pieces of them. And you know, usually that's the age that girls learn tatreez, even as well pre-1948. It was taught like mother to daughter or grandmother to daughter. That's how it was passed down. So that's usually the case for a lot of girls. And then, you know, over time they end up dropping it. For me, I think I was just a very stubborn little person that I did not give up this idea that I wanted to make a quilt. But over time, I ended up just decreasing the number from like 100 little, you know, squares pieces. We call them kanavat. I ended up decreasing it from like 100 to like 70. Then I was like, I'll just do 50. Okay, whatever. I'll just settle at 28. So I did 28 little squares, and it took me 12 years to finish it. Um, so I did 3 or 4 of them every year during the summer, and then I eventually became this quilt that I still have, and I stitched it all together. And then, so that's how I learned. It was just something that my mom taught me very quickly, and then I just kept at it for 12 years. Tatreez really does require a lot of persistence and patience, and it's also very meditative, so I don't know why it just stuck around, it just did.
Mm.
But, I took a break, when I went to go get my master's from the University of Chicago, and then I got back into traditional embroidery, like on traditional garments, and that's when I, went over to my aunt, who is a really great artist herself, and so she taught me so much more that goes into that. But that's how I really got into it, and then it just snowballed into me starting Badan and just continuing the work of preserving this work.
Mashallah, and we're so happy that you stuck with it. That little girl that that was so persistent. Now you are, you're doing workshops for Tatreez across the nation. So, mashallah, I love that persistence. We'll take a break now, and we'll be back with Bayan. We are back at this Hijabi Life with our guest Bayan, and we're talking today about Tatreez, a Palestinian art of embroidery. So, Bayan, I wanted to know, you started to mention the fact that the Tatreez was something that taught you patience. So
Mhm.
I wanted to touch a little bit more on what this art kind of packs into it. Is there some kind of like soul work that also you're able to kind of express through it? It's beautiful to look at, but does it also teach you, patience and
Mhm.
those types of
Mhm.
virtues? I saw someone recently, again, during this very difficult time, going on live, and she was doing a stitch with me. It kind of
Mhm.
like building community around Tatreez. So speak
Yeah.
on those types of values.
Yeah, so I think anyone that's practiced the threes, even just for a little bit, for example, like a lot of my students as well that come to class, whether they continue it afterwards or not, I think one of the most common experiences or words that you'll hear about Tatreez is that it's very meditative. I think Tatreez has so much built into it, not just the patience that comes with it, not just the perseverance, not just, a way to sort of meditate and just cope with what might be happening around you. But it also really does have a built-in community structure built into it. It is a very community-oriented task because it is a very labor-intensive, time-consuming task, and it's always nicer to practice time-consuming art forms, whether that be the trees or even, for example, food, to do those in community. For example, my aunt who used to stitch, something that she told me when she used to stitch overseas when she used to live in Palestine is she would just start stitching on her balcony, and then all of a sudden, her neighbors would see her, and her sisters-in-law would join her, and all of a sudden you have like 10 women stitching on the balcony, trying to finish up pieces, whether it was for themselves or for someone else. So it is a very community oriented task, and I think because of that, it allows for people to gather and to debrief what's going on. So even myself, I did a couple of lives with a few other Tatreez artists on online that just during this past week with what's going on in Gaza as a sort of in a way it was a healing circle. It was a resistance Tatreez circle, but in a way it was healing to just gather, whether you're talking about what's going on or not. It's just a way to be in community, and that in of itself helps heal a little bit of your soul and your heart. And that's been happening all throughout this week with myself and with other Tatreez artists that I know. I just even came back from another retreat where there was a lot of us stitching together, and and that moment was just so, so incredibly important for us to gather, to stitch, to be in community, and also to recharge. Because when it comes to the Palestinian cause, we are all in this for the long haul, and there's a lot of people that are banking on our burnout, and that is something that we cannot allow. And the one way that you can combat burnout is to be in community. There's another Tatreez club as well. I'm a part of a Watan Palestine, which is an art studio that is based in Chicago. So we have gatherings there every month as well to stitch. And so those are just community hubs to just, again, gather and heal. And that is a really important way to just, not just resist what's going on, but again, heal from what's going on as well, because there's a lot of secondhand trauma happening as well.
Right. Speaking of building community, I want to talk about your workshops. That's another way that you are, you're going on live, you're stitching together, you're, gathering with other artists, but you're also teaching, and you're sending that knowledge down, the pipeline, the generational, instead of curse, the generational blessing, or whatever's the opposite. So I want to talk a little bit more about your brand as well. I'm assuming that your sweatshirt is from your
Yeah,
brand.
yes, it is. Yeah.
So talk more about your brand and your workshops as well. I want the people watching, if they're in any community around the US, or even if you want to go international, I don't know if you do it internationally.
Might as
Yeah,
well.
we want you to get booked. We want you to be booked and busy teaching everyone
Inshallah.
Tatreez. So tell us more
Yeah.
about your brand.
Yeah, so Badan is something that I started fairly recently. It was something that was just born out of just pure passion and love for the craft. I had just, there's just sometimes things in your life that just, again, there's no beginning, there's no end. It just comes. And I
Yeah.
think Badan for me was really one of those things. And the intention behind it is really and it is a creative design house and also educational space. So we are in the space of making sure that we are trying to innovate in Tatreez and design work, and also it is an educational space. So the educational space really comes in with the workshops. So we do hold workshops all across the country. There's different levels of skill based on the community's skill level. I just closed out a tour actually this past summer where I believe we visited around 18 cities, and it was just so nice to see the reception of people just being intrigued and learning about Tatreez. And I genuinely don't think that I would be able to do what I do if people were not interested in learning. And so I think for the most part, people have been very gracious and very humbled to learn the craft and have continued it. And, sometimes I'll get pictures from students who like learn something from my class, and then all of a sudden they're on this like really huge journey and creating this really, really big project. And I think that is something that I am very proud to say that we do, is to just offer people that accessibility to that knowledge, especially for Palestinians and non-Palestinians in the diaspora. That is also part of the mission that Badan is to really give that access and that knowledge to us in the diaspora to help us connect to the land back home. I mean, that's part of the reason I called it Badan. So
Mm.
Badan is a word in Arabic that means body, like it means your body.
Mm.
But in the Tatreez world, there is nine, on average, there's sometimes more, nine pieces of a dress. So you'll have like the chest panel, you'll have the two sleeves,
Mm.
you'll have some side parts called banayak, and then you'll have the front skirt part and the back skirt part. That is called the badan.
Ah.
And so the reason I named it that way is because it just dawned on me how, being a Palestinian in the diaspora is you're uprooted from your land, but you cannot uproot me from my traditions.
Mm.
Not Tatriz isn't something that we just wear. Like we don't only wear our badan, which is what the dress is called, but we are our badan. You
Mm.
cannot separate the two. And that is something that I very, very much stress. Again, we cannot separate that craft from its people. So regardless of who's learning it, because there's a lot of non-Palestinians that also are learning in our classes, and that's something that is incredibly beautiful. Again, the cross stitch exists in a few other cultures as well, so it's really nice to build that community, but to make sure that we always tie it back to what's going on in Palestine.
Mashallah. So, what you mentioned about Palestinians in diaspora. So, I went to a high school back in the Chicago area, probably around where you are. I'm not really sure. Um, it was like 90, probably 8% Palestinian. So, I grew up around Palestinians from like middle school all the way through high school, and then college, met more Palestinians. So Palestinian culture has been around me for a very long time. And one thing about Palestinians, mashallah, they will teach you their culture. They will speak Arabic to you, and you better understand it. And you'll pick up on it so fast. Even the Falahi like dialect, mashallah, like just the amount of culture in that school. The like using the lunch table to like make a tabla sound.
Really good,
Everyone
yeah.
just breaks out in like debka.
Um,
And I know all these like Arabic songs that I don't know what I'm even saying, but like my
yeah.
friends are like eating the food and like singing the songs and like doing the dances. Like everything was so Palestinian about that school. And I honestly miss it so much. And these are all
Mhm,
Palestinians, of course, in the diaspora that holding
mhm.
on to culture.
Yeah.
Um, you know, the parents sending the kids back to Palestine to learn the language and to
Mhm,
eat the food and to like
mhm.
to learn how to make the different breads and things like that. Like
Yeah,
it's just beautiful how
yeah.
that is being passed down. And I think during that time that I was around so many Palestinians, I don't think I truly understood how important it was for them to break out in Debka almost every
Yeah.
single day and to wear like over their uniform like the print that you have,
Yeah.
yeah, the kufiya, right,
Mhm.
on their shoulders. It was just beautiful. So I wanted to mention that as well. I really appreciate being able to be immersed in a
Yeah.
Palestinian environment, knowing now how rare it
Mhm.
might be, you know.
Yeah.
So I just wanted
Yeah,
to
it's
say
really important. I think for all children of the diaspora, like even a lot of us come from, immigrant backgrounds as well. So I think there's always that like element of like I want to make sure to learn where, my parents are from and make sure that I pass that down to my kids. I think for Palestinians, there's just an added layer there because there is an active erasure of that culture. Sometimes it's very blatant, like what's going on right now. And
Mhm.
sometimes when you have little lulls, it's very it's never a lull. There's always, that erasure is always happening, whether it's quiet or in our faces. But I
Yeah.
think there's just this built-in thing for Palestinians to make sure that, again, when there's an active, uh, there's an active erasure happening against your culture, it just gives you even more of a reason to learn. I mean, even today with what's happening, there's more of an interest to learn Tatreez. There's more of an interest. Again, I have Badan. I also work in a community space where I plan events for Palestinians, and there's just more of an interest. You see people really wanting to come out and learn and not just learn the culture, but like acknowledge what's happening. And I think that acknowledgement is really important for our entire communities to participate in. It's not just a Palestinian cause, it is very much so a cause for everyone for so many different layers and reasons.
Right, right. I fully appreciate, you know, the Palestinian culture, and I'm so happy to be talking to you today. We do have to take a break, and we'll be back when Bayan is going to be sharing with us a bit of her poetry. We are back with This Hijabi Life and our guest, Bayan, who is here talking about the Palestinian art of Tatreez. Bayan, you're also a poet as well as a Tatreez artist and
Mhm.
instructor. Share with us a little bit of your poetry. I am a big fan of spoken word, as long as it's good.
Mhm.
and
Like,
I know
seriously?
yours is good. So share with us a couple of your favorite pieces.
Yes, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to share some of my poetry, and to just highlight it. I actually chose a couple of poems that are about Palestine, so I think it's very on topic. You know what? Are you gonna be my first critic with this? Are you gonna snap for me?
Yes, of course, I will snap for you, but I will not criticize you.
Okay, okay, wonderful. So I think I can read, I have 2 poems. I think there's one that's a little bit shorter and one that's a little bit, longer, so I'll read them both just to kind of, help center us. Again, it's about, they're both about Palestine, and I think, again, with mentioning what is happening, in Gaza right now, I think it might, um regardless of how far away we get from this, it will always still be very important to listen to, but to come to these poems with that in mind is really important because it will help inform what you take away from it. But the first poem is called Tell Me. Tell me how 2 arms are enough to carry 3 children when they tell you to run. Tell me, oh curly-headed child, how that dust got in your hair after they pulled you from underneath there. Tell me, oh Palestinian in the diaspora, how your native tongue now speaks more than one. Tell me, oh Aqsa, how your sanctity was attacked while the whole world watched. Tell me, O man of Jaffa, how you will return when they stole your land, your home, and buried your birth. Tell me, Ya Sitti, about the time you were born. Tell me about a free Palestine so I can yearn.
There's your snaps, girl, mashallah. Okay, second piece. Yes.
The second one is called That One Day Is Soon Coming, and it's one that I wrote actually after visiting a Palestine Rights Conference, which is a Palestinian literature art festival, where a lot of Palestinian authors and writers and just folks that appreciate the craft were at. And I wrote this after having visited it, and I think it's very relatable for any Palestinian that has ever been anywhere and then has gathered in a room with a bunch of Palestinians and then has dispersed and to go back home, quote unquote. So it's called That One Day Is Soon Coming. Post travel blues don't even begin to describe the emptiness that can't quite be pinpointed as to why until you are on a plane, in a car, looking out the window of your train, coming to the realization that you are returning without your community, without your people. You have left rooms filled with hundreds of Palestinians having exchanged origin stories and shared histories that coming back home doesn't quite feel like home because it'll always be missing the most crucial ingredient, your kin. It's not natural to have parts of your body dismembered across unknown lands, unreachable, like a heart struggling to pump blood to veins that have dried up, intangible, like a stiff body that only leaves you feeling dead, fragmented. That's what it's like being without your people, unbearable. Like pieces of your heart will forever be in more places than one, never with you, never whole, always in search of another. Palestinian to ask, where are you from? Hoping that with the answer comes a semblance of connection and ignition for one beat, one pump one inhale of oxygen that resuscitates your scattered limbs, that they may recognize the tune of the drum, that they find each other and find their way back to the source, so that one day the answer soon changes from my grandma's village back home to down the street, we just moved in. Which part of the diaspora are you from?
SubhanAllah. You know, that one, I feel like that one was deeper, right? That one was a lot more deep.
Mm.
And that question, where are you from? Like that is
Mhm.
a deep one for Palestinians. And I think that that builds a lot of community.
Mhm.
I remember even being asked myself, you know, clearly, I mean, maybe not so clearly, but I think clearly I'm not Palestinian. But I would be asked that so much. And in Arabic, like, as if they were asking me which, like, town in Palestine. And,
Yeah.
and to me, it was kinda confusing, but now I feel like it was an honor, you know, because I
Mhm.
was almost immediately, like, hugged into that community with all those Palestinians, and I think it's a beautiful way of sharing, you know,
Yeah.
where you're from, in hopes that you find your people, you know? So,
Yeah. Yeah, I almost didn't realize how much depth there was until after, again, after you're in a room with all of these people, it's like you don't know what you're missing, because
yeah.
we are kids of the diaspora, so we're used to
Mhm.
constantly being dispersed and away, and not in, a village or a place that has everyone that looks like you, and dresses like you, and speaks like you, and is of your family or knows your family or something like that. So it's yeah, it's just something, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. So I was reading online. I have a little quote from a website. It says, after the Palestinian Nakba of 1948, when more than 700,000 people were expelled from their homes across Palestine, the art became, meaning the art of Tatreez, became a symbol of displacement and resistance. Historically, Tatreez patterns varied from village to village because of limited transportation. But after 1948, when people from different areas, and it's funny because we were talking about where are you from different areas started living together in refugee camps, the distinctions began to fade. So I was wondering, in terms of your own family history, how did the Nakba of 1948 affect your family? And do you happen to have any Tatreez garments that were actually preserved from former generations that you might be, like, honored to wear, say, at a wedding or something like that in your own generation?
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting question, how the Nakba affected my family, because I don't know. Again, I don't think we realize it until you really sit and grapple with it. I think there isn't a family in Palestine that has not been affected by the Nakba.
Mhm.
I recently saw something online that was a little graphic, that was like, it was like where I ended up in the world, and it was just two, it was like a pie chart, and there was like a little tiny pizza triangle, and it was like luck, and then the rest of it was uh, the direction that my grandparents chose to run in.
Mm,
And as a Palestinian, I think your fate, and again, as a Palestinian in the diaspora, I'm talking about myself, is, you see what's going on overseas, and I think the most common thing that we think about, and that I've heard my community talk about, is to say, that that could have been me. Um, Literally, if my grandparents ran in a different direction, or if they were from a different village, and I think that that just strikes me. But for my family, my family is mostly all from, what's now called today the West Bank, so areas around Ramallah. My maternal grandma is actually from Haifa, though, and I didn't have the honor of listening to her story until I was a little bit older, even just a few years ago, where she told me she was, my grandma was born in 1944, so she was 5 years old when the Nakba happened, and she was telling me her own story of how she still remembers how her dad, which is my great grandpa, picked her up, put her up on the back of the wagon, and they left. And she was like, "Lama marratuna," which is when they kicked us out. They forced us into exile, and she ended up going into, again, what's now known as the West Bank areas in Ramallah, and that's how, she met my grandpa, and they got married, and then, eventually ended up in the United States. But again, I don't think there's any family that isn't affected by it. And had I not heard my own story from my grandma, I don't think that I would have ever known that, because again, the majority of my family is not from Haifa. It's my grandmother. So
Mm.
um it's very, and it's really crazy to think about. But the second part of your question, I think, was about if I had any
Tatreez
dresses passed
garment.
down.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, so that's also another interesting question, because I think now we have this way that we engage with Tatreez that wasn't necessarily, or isn't necessarily, the way that everybody engages with Tatreez, depending on where you are.
Mm.
So, for Tatreez, for us nowadays, at least for me, whenever I find something in my family that is has Tatreez on it, or is I consider it like an antique piece, something that I want to preserve,
Mm.
something that I want to continue to pass on. But for my grandma, her stitching, she stitched a lot of clothes in her day.
Mhm.
But for them, it was what they wore on a day-to-day basis.
Mm.
So when it got old, you just gave it away,
Yeah.
right? It wasn't necessarily, or you pass it within the family, or you sold it or something. So
Mhm.
it depends on how we interpret, how, what we consider to be passing down of clothing. And there's different ways to engage with it. And I
Mm.
think because we're in the diaspora, it's even harder. I think it's very, very rare for people to have family dresses that they can actually pass down.
Mm.
Um, my family, I think, is one of the more rare ones that we did have some.
Mhm.
Uh, it wasn't though from my when my grandma was younger. It was pretty much from the 80s. I do have a dress of when they immigrated from Kuwait to the US, and I call it like my family's immigration film, because it's the only dress that my grandma kept, because it had really a really huge sentimental value to her, because it was when, I think the story goes, usually the details are iffy, when a grandma tells you her story, like, you never know, like, it's like, okay. But the story goes is that, like, they bought the fabric in Kuwait, and then she finished stitching it here in the States. And it was also when my grandpa was alive, so, and then, he's passed away now, so, may Allah forgive him. But, um, that's the only dress she kept, and so I have that, and I hold on to it, and I'm planning on keeping it and preserving it. I have other dresses as well from my mom and my aunts who were very ingrained in Tatreez culture. I'm very, very grateful to say that all my aunts practiced Tatreez when they were younger, including my mom. It was something ingrained in the family, which isn't the case for a lot of families, but for me it was. So I
Yeah.
do have a lot of other dresses from like the 2000s and stuff like
Mhm.
that were passed down.
Mhm.
But not a lot, right? So whenever we do find something, it's like you do want to make sure that the
Right.
time the time that it was created is what gives it its value. And
Yeah.
that's how I also approach my own work now. When I stitch something, even this weekend I was stitching a part of my own thobe, and I made a mental note, and I keep a journal as well, to say, I stitched this portion when what was happening in Gaza is happening, right?
Mhm.
I stitched this portion when I was watching the movie Farha and really connecting and
Mhm.
really seeing that representation on screen. It takes you through your life. And that's why so many of these artists will say that your thobe is your story. It tells your story. And
Yeah.
oftentimes we have the dresses, but the women are no longer with us, and so that's why it's incredibly important for us to preserve those voices, and to make sure that we are acknowledging the women that wear these dresses, that
Mhm.
made these dresses during incredible times of struggle and of difficulty, or even just if it was for someone's wedding, right? To really remember their names and their stories and their faces. Um, I have this really great friend that wrote a poem about how, Tatreez is something that the colonizer can't touch. They can't colonize it. Even
Mhm.
if they colonize the people, the dresses will live on, and it
Mhm.
will tell our story. And even if we cease to exist, our stories will live on. And I think that's why Tatreez is so incredibly important. So, there's a lot of dresses in my family that got passed down, but hopefully I can create a lot more that can get passed down for other people who don't have that opportunity.
Yeah. I can tell, Bayan, that you need a little bit of a moment, right? Like I started off this episode saying, like what we wear, it's always deeper, you know, as Muslim women, as Palestinian women, as, you know, hijabis, it's always deeper than just, you know, a pretty color pattern or a pretty print. So we'll give you that moment and we'll take a break and we'll come back. Welcome back to This Hijabi Life. We are wrapping up an incredible show with Bayan. We've been talking about Palestinian culture and art and resistance. We've talked about your brand, and now we've shared poetry and stories. What a wholesome show. I just feel so warm inside.
I know, me too.
I want to end with just a reminder that as we're talking for this recording, I know that the show will actually roll out sometime after this, but in this moment, there is a crisis going on in Gaza. It is just another part of an ongoing struggle, of course, of occupation in Palestine and genocide, ethnic cleansing. I want to ask you if there are any resources you'd like to share on how to help the people of Palestine, as this will still be an ongoing problem. You know, as this episode is published, this has been decades long, and inshallah, we'd love to hear if you have any resources to help the people of Palestine.
Yeah, I think regardless of how far removed we get from this current assault, these things will always be important for us to do in our daily lives. I think I would say the most important thing to do, or that we can take away from, watching this episode or learning what we're learning about Gaza, is to do something, not nothing. I think whatever it is we do, it cannot be nothing. It cannot be complicity. It cannot. So I saw this video today, actually, of a woman from Gaza, and she was saying, she was just her voice is just still ringing in my brain. Of She was asking this question of, do they really see us? Like, we're taking these videos, do they see us? Do they see, like, can you guys see what's happening? Because if you just see what's happening, so I think it's really important to not do nothing. I think, especially if you're in the States, regardless of where you are, but especially if you're in the States, we are positioned uniquely to take political action. And I think what is also needed is for us to take that stand, to make sure that we are calling our representatives, that we are calling our congressmen and women, to make sure that we are voting people who we think will support our causes. That is incredibly important. Making sure that we're sharing what's going on online, making sure that and this is underrated, but having uncomfortable conversations with our friends, with our family, with our coworkers, challenging yourself, challenging your own beliefs, reading books. There's a lot of great resources at Watan Palestine as well, which is the community center in which I work, that has a lot of books on just the history, the art, a lot of cookbooks as well, that we can read up on and make sure that we just understand, have a little bit more understanding of the cause, and of course prayer and prayer and more prayer, because the one who can really help walk us through to the end, until we get to a free Palestine and end it to the occupation, is Allah. So making sure that we pray, and if you did all of that, then that's amazing. Do it again, and then do it again and again, and until we get to that resolve at the end, inshallah. So that's what I would recommend. There is another really great one that I will just recommend someone to follow, is the Adala Justice Project. They will also give you direct action items, more than I can surmise right now. So they're someone great to follow too.
That's very important that you mentioned that particular resource, but then also right before that, you mentioned prayer. And I saw what I've been seeing as I open up my TikTok app particularly is that there's so many people who are unlearning their Islamophobia in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many people who are sharing, like even I saw a video of, they're speaking in Arabic, and I'm just thinking, okay, if people only knew like what they're saying in these moments as they're holding the bodies of, their the dead children, all the shuhada, like they're just making du'as, they're saying alhamdulillah. And I said, if people only knew that all of these phrases that the Palestinians are saying in Arabic, they're actually du'as. They're saying la ilaha illallah because they're hoping to die where that is their last words. And they're hoping that the person who they might be holding, or they're wrapping, they're shrouding them in the white garment, the white cloths, that maybe their last words were la ilaha illallah. They're saying hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakil. Like these are, again, I just got chills.
Yeah, me too.
These are prayers that have been passed down. Like hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakil was something that Prophet Ibrahim said before he was thrown into the fire. He said those words, and the fire was made cool for him. So these prayers that we're praying in tahajjud, or like in our sujood, and we're at the masjid, we're gathering together and we're praying, like these are not the least that we could do. These are the things that we should be doing on the regular. These are the most powerful things to do. And I think because we whisper them and we say them like in the night when no one's around, and we don't typically post our dua moments, it's not a public thing. It feels as if it's just the minute.
It's lesser than. Yeah, I agree. I think if anything, the people of Gaza are really, in a way, Allah is honoring them by, there's so many people that have grabbed the Quran to understand. There's so many people whose hearts I feel like have been like just more fortified with faith, to be in community, to be in prayer. That is not just like the last thing that we do. That should be the first thing that we do. And I think, that is something that Gaza is teaching us right now as well, with how much they're going through. And the first and the only one that they call upon is God. And so I think that's something that we definitely are learning from them.
Yes. So, Bayan, as we wrap up the show, we want everyone to be able to connect with you, to email you, to book you for workshops, etc., to buy your clothing from your brand. Tell us how to connect with you and find you online, and what would be your final words as we wrap up the episode.
So you can definitely find me at Badan Collective. That's on Instagram. That's also our website, so badancollective.com. I usually check all the messages and all the emails. So you can also put requests in for workshops there for me to set something up in your community. It will also have, the website will have other things like the Tatreez kits and the collection that that I'm wearing now. This is just one of a few pieces that we have. It's just a way to help, you feel represented, whether you're Palestinian or not, to just have a connection back to the homeland. So badancollective.com, or just search us up on Instagram. You should be able to find us. Um, as for my last words, I think it would be really important for people to, since we're talking about Tatreez, I think I will just stress that Tatreez is something beautiful. It is an art form. It is a form of expression, and it is something to engage in, to not be intimidated to engage in it, and to not be intimidated to ask. It is a very welcoming space, and again, it is something beautiful and something that will help you. It's another outlet for you to learn about the Palestinian people, the Palestinian community, the Palestinian cause as well, and just for a place for you to find a sense of connection and community as well. So, definitely please join us. Please engage in the craft, and hopefully you walk away with everything that we've mentioned today, and feeling a little lighter when you practice it.
Inshallah. So I want to thank you, Bayan, for an amazing episode, from an enlightening episode, and for making, us a little bit closer to your sacred art of Tatreez. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you so much for having me.
As we wrap up the show, I always like to share something as well. And it's so interesting. Just this past week, I was selling something. Actually, I was giving away a little baby swing, right? And the woman who said she wanted to have the swing, she ended up being Palestinian. We talked a little bit on WhatsApp, and she sent me the most beautiful passage. And I think it speaks to the beauty of, again, just that being able to connect with Palestinian culture, um, and for her to just interact with me over something mundane like giving a baby swing away, and to send me something this powerful and so beautiful. I think it really speaks to the strength and the resilience of Palestinian people. So I just want to read that passage. It says, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lifted the veil for you for just 10 minutes and you could see the sky of Palestine, you'd see a sight of wonder. Waves of angels racing to ascend with the souls of the martyrs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a special celebration. I swear by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, besides whom there is no God but him, the sky is filled with the scent of perfume. These people have completed their test in this world, so there's no need for them to stay in this world. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen for them paradise. You see the painful images, don't you? But my messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam and your messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam swore by God that the martyr will not experience pain except that of a pinch. He sallallahu alaihi wasallam said this word for word. So just as if I come and pinch you by the hand, do not fear for them. I know you are saddened, so remember what the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. No one in this world dies and wishes to return to this world except the martyr. They wish to die for his sake 1,000 times over, to keep dying for his sake. I am now seeing things in Gaza that if you saw them with your own eyes, you would die of joy. These martyrs are alive and eternally provided for by their sustainer, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I leave you with that passage and that imagery. I pray that it's a comfort for anyone who is feeling a sense of turmoil over what is happening in Gaza, particularly now. And I pray that during our lifetime, if not ours, then maybe the lifetime of our children, we see a free Palestine. Ameen. Tune in next week when we'll be having another amazing conversation with another amazing woman about modest fashion in the modern age. Till next time, stay blessed and covered beautifully.